Hello there, and welcome to the first ever episode, the pilot episode for the Motorsport Lounge podcast. Now, let's get this straight. This is just a trial run today. This is not the finished article, but we've got lots to talk about. 2021 rules and regulations, they've been released. So I feel this is a perfect opportunity just to test the waters just a little bit. The full podcast will be officially launched. I say officially, it's a YouTube podcast, but it'll be officially launched around about December time for the winter break of Formula One. So today, it's just a bit of a sit back, have a relax and enjoy. Feedback in the comments below would be lovely, but enough talk, let's crack on with the first ever episode. Welcome everyone to the first ever, the pilot episode of the Motorsport Lounge podcast. I've been waiting a while to say that, I can't deny, but it's going to be a long one today. That's the idea. Many of you, for the entire 2019, I almost said 2018 there, but the entire 2019 season have been banging on about me doing a podcast, doing some kind of long format video. And whilst I really wanted to, I felt I wanted to do something a little bit different. And today's episode, don't get me wrong, this is not the finished article. I will keep saying that, not just about the podcast, but also the 2021 rules. This is not the finished article today. This is just a soft launch, just so I can get used to doing podcasts. I did one last year, Let's Talk F1, just sat down by myself, and it took a lot of effort to do. And I felt it didn't really get the response I was looking for. So I knew I had to change things up, make things a little bit more the F1 reviews kind of way of doing things, rather than it being a laid-back, mundane podcast. I wanted to add that little bit of flair that we like to sometimes have on the channel, that bit of spice, that bit of juiciness that we like to add. So I was trying to think of something different. And trying to find something different in the Formula One community is sometimes very difficult. So today's episode will be very straightforward. Just me talking to you, having a breakdown of the 2021 rules and regulations, because there's a lot to go through. And I mentioned this yesterday in the USA preview video. Just sitting down for 10 minutes and talking about these regulations is not enough time. There is so much to go through. So many little nooks and crannies as well, and loopholes that potentially could be exploited. So I just wanted to sit down and talk about that. But also, I get that a lot of people are going to be doing that. So, I've not seen many long-form versions just yet, so I might be the first, depending on how quick I am with editing, which isn't usually very quick. But I also wanted to quickly, before we get onto that, first of all, timestamps below. So if you feel like you've wasted 3 minutes, feel free to go down there, and you should be able to just jump straight to 2021. Happy days for you. I'll see you there. But I just wanted to quickly start off again by just reiterating what I want to do with this podcast, because again, a lot of people do normal Formula One podcasts. Off the top of my head, I can think of Missed Apex podcast. I know Sean, the F1 Word, did a podcast for a little bit. The F1 Debate Show, Dan, not Debate Show. The F1 Debate Show, those guys over there. Late Breaking do one. The WTF1 podcast, the Pit Lane podcast. I don't want to do the same thing. I don't want to rinse and repeat. So my thinking was that, first of all, I thought, maybe I just sit down and talk by myself. But is that fun? A long form? I mean, if it is and you like that, put that in the comments below. But I'd really like to do a one-on-one style podcast. And I had a little chat with Jordan from the F1 Debate Show. Nothing too long, but just brief, saying I wasn't trying to copy what he was doing, because I really love their series, YouTubers Decoded. So feel free to, I'll link them in the description, because I am loving that series. It is awesome. Hot take, I think it's my favourite Formula One podcast on YouTube. Well, I know it's kind of a podcast. I think they'll allow me to say that. I absolutely love that. I think it's awesome. But I want to do a one-on-one style thing, and a few of you will already know this. I've actually recorded a few episodes of this podcast already in the past, but I've never actually released them because, from my part, I didn't think I was good enough. And last year, you may also know that I did a podcast with Formula E Zone. And even that, I think, especially in the early episodes, I was really quite nervous. And getting used to taking a kind of lead role in that kind of situation was a little bit strange. for me, and something I maybe don't think I got right in the early stages. So I've been learning, and thank you to everyone who's helped me do a few trial runs of this podcast. I really needed it, don't get me wrong. But the main idea, it's taken me 5 minutes and I'm still rambling. That's the whole point of a podcast, to allow me to ramble. But the main idea is that it's me. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I know some of you are on your way to work in the car or whatever, so apologies, don't look at the screen. But if you're watching on YouTube, you will see that I've got a box with my name on it, very lovely, with a lovely little description of myself. For audio listeners, the description is Commander-in-Chief of the Grosjean Army. That's how I like to view myself. However, on a usual episode, there will be another box on the screen, I'm hoping, with a guest. So it'll be me on the left and the guest details on the right. And that's all you'll be able to see on the screen. But every episode, I'm thinking, logistics are very difficult and I can't really predict what it's going to be like at the end of the year and how busy people will be and if they'll even want to talk Formula 1 with me. Probably not. But I'm hoping that every episode I get on someone a little bit different. So it might be that one day I get a couple of YouTubers on. Another day, I get a friend from uni on. Another day, I may even get the biggest Hamilton fanboy in the world, my dad. Maybe he will come on. So I'm just leaving it open at the moment. But the idea, a one-on-one podcast, at first, I thought about doing something. The first ever episode I did was a kind of what the F1 debate show are doing, YouTubers Decoded. And the very first practice run of this podcast was in that kind of style. I got a YouTuber on, had a discussion about how they got into Formula 1, why they started YouTube, their struggles, their kind of vision for the future. And like I said a minute ago, I just think I wasn't good enough. And I really like the idea. YouTubers Decoded has come out, and that's brilliant. So I don't want to just do a rip-off of that. That's unfair. They're doing a brilliant job. So I've had a little rethink. And I think, you've probably guessed this already. The plan is, it's me, one other person, and then I'll just talk about a topic. So probably the first few episodes will probably be 2021 is what I'm thinking. Maybe that's because it's just come out now, but that kind of thing. So let's just say I get on PewDiePie. For example. And for that episode, it's PewDiePie as the special guest, and we're talking about, I don't know, which is the best F1 livery of all time. Who is the best team of all time, best driver of all time, I don't know. Just there's a central topic, and the length, I'm thinking between half an hour to an hour. Depends on the topic, depends on the guest, because if they're boring, I don't want you here. Dear me. You know what I'm saying. I want to make this as interesting for you as I can, is the idea here. Many people will do news. Many people will do a chat show between many different people. I just want to make it small and concise, hopefully, and a bit of fun as well. Maybe at the end, I've thought about this as well, doing a few quick-fire questions with a guest as well. I don't know. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because that's the idea. Just making this fun, a bit of a laugh, and yeah, I might get some guests on and there might be a bit of a grump, but I'm hoping I'll be very selective with my guests and making sure they're a bit of fun. And hey, you might just say you just want me. I'm not too sure if I can pull off an hour every time just by myself, but some episodes I'm sure, like today, will just be me. I've been going about 10 minutes and I've barely mentioned 2021, and that is the whole point of today, is to talk about 2021. So enough rambling. Hopefully you understand the format I'm going with. I'm going to call this episode 0 because it's not really going to be like the rest of them, but this will be available on the podcasting services. I'm not even sure what they are yet. Haven't even looked into it. That's how prepared I am for this, but I just thought it'd be brilliant just to start. You don't care. 2021, let's move on. And let's start with the big one. There's lots of big ones. I've got a rough order on my page here. My page is so messy with notes because there are so many changes, it's a bit unreal. But I think the biggest one, and the one that you can see at face value, it's even on the screen right now, is the design of the car. I know that's a very basic statement, but the look of the car, the aesthetics. And Formula 1 have said, I listened to the entire stream yesterday. I'm very proud of myself for doing this, read the entire 86-page sporting regulations book. Took me a while, it really did, and there are some things in that book, I know it's not an actual book, but I'm calling it that. There are some things in there that are so strange. One of the official regulations, right, is they've got to have 3 water bottles in the race cooldown room. That is in the rules and regulations. I mean, bizarre. There's plenty. It's a bit of a fun read, actually. I did quite enjoy it. It's available on the FIA website if you're really interested. It's got some strange things on it. Even just little bits and bobs about the national anthem. Yeah, it's a fun one. Anyway, the design of the car. Do we like it? Do we not like it? I'm going to put a poll on YouTube only. Sorry, audio listeners. In the top right-hand corner, you can vote if you like the look of the car. If you don't like the look of the car, I believe it'll be a 95-5 split. I think people love it. Just on the general consensus so far. My personal opinion, I quite like it. I'm not in love with it like some people, but then it's like the Halo, isn't it? I was not dead against the Halo like some people. I thought it'd be okay, and now I've got used to it. I think this will take some getting used to for me. Whereas when the 2017 car came out, I thought looked brilliant. I was in love with that instantly. This one, again, I like it, but it'll take me a little bit of time. I think the biggest thing for me is the mustache front wing and the rear wing. They're a little bit too, for me, for my personal taste, to me they look a little bit disproportionate, a little bit too big, I suppose, compared to the car. But even saying that, that's a very minor thing not to like, and I think it's more just changing of what I'm used to. I look back at a 2014 car now and think, my God, how ugly is that? Those really skinny cars that are long, I really don't like them. But at the time, I thought they were great. I thought they were perfect. So I think it's just that familiarity isn't quite there for me just yet. Big noticeable, I suppose, I was going to say non-additions there, but remainers, I would say. Shouldn't be saying remainers around Brexit. And that's let's not get too political today, boys and girls. Things that are staying is a better way of putting it. The Halo is remaining on the car. There was talk, it's better English. There was talk that the Halo might change to an aero screen, similar to what they're trying to introduce to IndyCar. And actually, please let me know, IndyCar fans, but I believe that they are introducing that next season, and they're working with Red Bull. Could be wrong, but I believe that's correct. Halo staying. Bit of a skinnier looking Halo. I think it's a better looking Halo, to be totally honest with you. Just like the Formula E car as well. I mean, I'm only looking at the image you're seeing on your screen right now. Like the Formula E car, I think it definitely fits the car much better than the current Formula 1 cars. Currently, it looks like they've just plonked a Halo on the front, and there you go. Box ticked, safety box ticked, we're sorted. This car seems to have it a little bit more intertwined with the whole design of the car. Of course, designers, your Adrian Newey's, your James Keys, they will try and exploit every little bit of aero they can. So all of these cars and all of these images we've seen so far, wouldn't surprise me if we had some crazy T-wing or something coming out of the blue showing up on these cars. But at the moment, the cars we have got, the very basic cars we've got, I think it looks quite nice. The other thing that I want to quickly mention before we get really technical, and I'm talking technical, one of the most technical videos I will ever do today. I've actually done some research into aerodynamics, boys and girls. I'm learning slowly. But the other thing, which I think people will want to talk about, or at least debate, I suppose, in the comments, is DRS. DRS is staying. And I suppose for most of us, I mean, I say most of us, myself and perhaps a younger generation than myself, DRS has always been in Formula 1. I mean, I started watching in 2006. DRS got introduced in 2011, I believe. So it's pretty much always been there for Formula 1. And it's something that I think over the years definitely isn't as controversial, but there is still a cult following of people that hate it and think Formula 1 has been ruined because of it. And I can see where those people are coming from. The only thing for me is that at the moment, we need DRS. DRS is an absolute must in 2019, or else overtaking wouldn't exist, which is a real shame. However, the whole point of 2021, it's everywhere, all over Formula 1 social media. The whole point is to make it easier to overtake. So why do we still need DRS? Well, I can imagine a lot of people are saying, If it's easier to overtake, why do we still need it? I get that. I think Formula 1, there is so much emphasis on 2021 saving the sport. And I think it will save the sport, actually. All of the changes I've seen so far, I think are brilliant. However, it's not guaranteed. And I will keep saying this. I said right at the beginning of today's episode, they keep saying it's a work in progress. And 2021 is the first changes. 2022, 23, 24 and 25, there will be more and more changes. So the DRS initially is going to stay, but they have said already that if it is easy to overtake and DRS makes it double easy to overtake, they will get rid of it. Job done. DRS was only supposed to be a short-term solution. It's slowly become a long-term solution. So now they're just making sure 100% they've got it right before they take it away. I mean, how awful would it be if they took away DRS? The cars could almost overtake, but not quite, and they needed to add DRS back in. What a kerfuffle. And imagine the media storm if that happened. So I get it. I understand. The idea and the design of the car, this is me starting to get technical now, boys and girls, is to make overtaking easier. Now, that sounds very easy, but it's a hell of a lot more difficult than I ever would have imagined to try and do that. So currently, the way the car is designed, chucks out a load of dirty air behind. That's how technical I'm going to get today, boys and girls. Real layman's terms. If you have no idea about aerodynamics as well, don't worry. I'm trying to explain this as easy as I can. Dirty air gets pumped out behind a car, like exhaust fumes, pretty much. But it's dirty, it's khaki-ness, mankiness. We don't want that. And that currently reduces downforce of the car behind by 50%. Not good, not good. Makes it harder to overtake. The new design, the khaki-ness coming out of the back of the car, is now pushed further up into the air rather than straight behind. So there is now less dirty air, more cleaner air, and now downforce is reduced only by 10% on the car behind. So it was 50% reduction, now 10%, which means it's a hell of a lot easier to follow. Still, there's a little bit of dirtiness going behind, but nowhere near what there currently is in Formula 1. They've done a bit of a demo, showing what the cars will be like to overtake. It's only on a game, so that is not believable, their demo that they did put out. But even for a dummy-dumb like me, that is good news. I can understand that reducing dirty air, making overtaking easier, is one of the top bullet points they needed to address, and they're getting that sorted. How they're doing that, and again, apologies if I'm not the most technical person. I'm sure someone like Chamber will do a video on this. It'll be much better than me talking about aerodynamics. That's why I'm doing it first, by the way, getting aerodynamics out the way. We'll talk about cost caps, 25 race calendars a little bit later on. Again, in the description, timestamps if you want. Ground effect. I had no idea what ground effect was before I started YouTube. I've only become aware thanks to Jonty's Corner and the F1 Word. I don't remember which podcast it was or live stream with those. And I got asked about ground effect, and I had no clue what was going on. I'd never heard of it, so I had to do some research then. Put it this way. It's the idea, I mean, again, this hasn't been tested. Ground effect is the suckiness, how a car sticks to the road, is to put it in layman's terms. And it's also the principle that, in theory, a Formula 1 car could drive upside down because it sticks to the ground so much. The only difference is if there's a disruption in that stickiness, it can make cars a little bit unpredictable and very dangerous and can cause them to fling up into the air. And yeah, that can be very dangerous. If I'm wrong, I am 100% sure someone in the comments will be able to put me on the right path there and help you out. But I believe, from a dummy's terms, that is what it means. It's coming back to the Formula 1. For the first time since 1982, and in 1982 it was completely outlawed. It's been banned ever since. So this is a huge revelation that they're bringing it back into Formula 1. Yes, it's still dangerous. There is still an element of extreme danger with ground effect. However, to get around this, and to also partner up with the fact one of their main goals is to make Formula 1 more affordable, is regulating a hell of a lot of parts on this car. So, again, apologies if I'm being far too basic for some of you geniuses, because I know some of you are quite smart. The idea is that a car using ground effect has two Venturi tunnels. They're on the side of the car. There you are. That's how basic I'm going. They are not regulated. However, the T-tray is. And the T-tray goes underneath the car. That is what is known, I sound like such an idiot, as a prescribed part. That's new for this year. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the T-tray sits underneath the car. And that is a part that has to be made the same by every single team. So you can't have one team adding a little winglet, adding a little cut somewhere. You can't have that. It's got to be the exact same on every single team, which when you're dealing with dangerous, I suppose, parts and mechanics like this, it's completely understandable. So I imagine there will be a bit of backlash over ground effects. However, judging what I can from being in the community for almost 2 years now, not quite just yet, but at the end of this month I'll have been doing YouTube for 2 years. A lot of people have been asking for ground effect, and as safety has gotten better and better over the last decade, I would say, in Formula 1, they have got to a point now where they can say, yeah, we have understood ground effect enough to make it safe enough to bring into Formula 1. And the benefits it has, making it easier to overtake, allowing closer racing, I can't be too angry. I really can't, because that's what Formula 1 needs. At its core right now, it needs to make racing better. I said this after the Mexican Grand Prix weekend. Everything wrong with Formula 1 was highlighted in Mexico. Say what you want about the track, overtaking was nigh on impossible, even though drivers like Leclerc had 2 compounds better tyres, 50 laps newer tyres, still couldn't catch and overtake the boys in front. That's an extreme example, but it's still an example. And that shouldn't be in Formula 1. There's more changes there than just the cars making it difficult to overtake. I mean, how tyres haven't been looked at yet, I don't know. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But ground effects, personally, again, I'm not an aerodynamicist whatsoever. I think that's a good thing. Barge boards, they have gone. That's something of note. That pretty much is down to the integration of adding ground effects. So again, I'm totally fine with that. I don't think they look that bad, actually, barge boards, but yeah, that's a thing. What else have I got on my notes for the technical aspects of Formula 1? Engine changes. Power unit changes. So, lots of talk about making Formula 1 as cheap as possible, really. And of course, that all revolves around the cost cap, which again, I'll talk about a little bit later on. How things are going to work now in 2021. First of all, parts, literally different parts of the Formula 1 car are being placed into 5 different classifications. So you've got your listed parts, which is your normal bog standard, your front wing, your chassis, the normal bits that each team makes individually. That's your listed parts. You've got your standard parts, which is the parts that are regulated, that everyone gets the exact same parts. So I believe that includes things like pit stop equipment, wheel rims is what I'm trying to say there. Fuel pumps, things like that. You've then got transferable parts. This is how Haas use their business model, I guess. Buying parts from teams like Ferrari. That is staying, which is really interesting. That's going to be really interesting to see if teams like Williams go down that route, or even new teams that come into Formula 1. There were lots of debate the last couple of years whether the Haas model was, first of all, sustainable, but also, should it even be allowed in Formula 1? So I'm really surprised they've kept that, but puts a smile on my face, because partner that with a cost cap, that could really entice new teams. So I'm a big fan of that one. There's 2 new part classifications. So first of all, prescribed parts. So that includes the T-tray I mentioned a little bit earlier on. So what this means is that the teams have to make it themselves. They can't just buy it. They have to make it themselves, but it has to be to the exact specification given to them from the FIA. So it's practically a listed part. Well, a prescribed part, a standard part. Oh, it's very difficult, but they have to be made the same. And finally, there is open parts. That is also a new part classification. And what that means is that teams like Red Bull and Toro Rosso, or AlphaTauri, as they will be named, they can work together to make a part and use it on both cars. How that comes under the cost cap, I don't know how they have to account for that. That's really interesting to see, but that is a thing in Formula One, so keep an eye on that. And I think for teams like Mercedes, this will really encourage them to make a B team. So keep an eye for a HWA or something like that coming into Formula One in the future. That is really interesting. Power units. Not many changes with power units. They're keeping them relatively similar, which I think works quite well. I think we're getting to a stage now at the end of 2019 where Mercedes, Ferrari, they're a pretty similar level power unit. Behind them, I think Renault and Honda also aren't that far behind anymore. So I think that's totally fine with me. Gearboxes, here's something interesting. Between 2021 and 2025, teams are only allowed one upgrade on gearboxes. One. They're really trying to make this kind of sustainable sport where there is as minimal waste as possible. I like this. I think this is a good change. So there'll be no real benefits from any team really plunging loads of money into gearboxes anymore because they're only allowed one upgrade. So that's interesting. Tyre blankets. That was something that's been heated, I would say, in the debates over the previous couple of weeks because the teams ruled they don't want to get rid of tyre blankets. Well, how ruling and governance is happening in Formula One is changing. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but tyre blankets will stay in Formula One, but they will leave in 2023. Here's where it gets fun. Engines. Teams, every team will have the option to buy the newest spec engine. So, to put this in better terms, because I understand I have just thrown a hell of a lot of information at you, so I'll calm down just a little bit for a minute or two. Let's take Williams. Williams buy an engine from Mercedes. However, Mercedes don't have to give them the most up-to-date engine. They don't have to give them the most up-to-date fuels. They don't have to give them the most up-to-date software. So the programs they use on their computers, to put it in basic terms. That is not a thing anymore. They're not allowed to do that. They have to at least give Williams the option to buy as much as they want. Williams, they might say, yep, we'll have the best engine, but we have our own software, our own fuel, so we don't want that. But they have to have the option to buy the best. What is also interesting, and Chase Carey's quote yesterday, I thought was very interesting. Now, this is what I wanted to do the podcast for, because there was something he said which really got my ears pricking up. So, first of all, fuel. We all know fuel's in Formula One. Refueling's not coming back. I'm not surprised at that, but that was something discussed. But fuel itself now has to be made up of 20% renewables. So, I don't know, 20% biofuels. I think it was the example given. What's more interesting is that Chase Carey himself has said Formula One's next big step, so after this regulations, their next big step is to look into renewable energies and renewable sources to make Formula One the pinnacle of technology once again. And I think he even just said to completely null their carbon footprint, which is not going to happen. And I've probably got that quote a little bit wrong, but I felt, and again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below on this because it's a real hot take. I really felt Chase Carey was just putting out feelers for an electric Formula One. Which, yeah, I know, I've really set the comments alight there, but there's no doubt Formula One will eventually go electric. And the big question is, when is that going to happen? Formula E and Alejandro Agag, who's not Formula One or Formula E CEO anymore, but he was, there is a rule in place, or a contract in place, that Formula E is the only electric single-seater. That contract will eventually come to an end. I believe it comes to an end in 2023. I believe. I probably should have looked that one up, but it's a difficult one to find proper and reliable information on that one. But there is a deal in place. So Formula One won't go electric for a while. Don't worry. Calm down. But I think logically and realistically, Formula One's next step will be to go to an electric engine or an electric power unit, because that's the next step. They're currently V6 hybrids. to get it any more renewable, they're going to have to go electric. Of course, they didn't say that yesterday, because I imagine that there's been a brilliant response to 2021, but if they'd have mentioned electric engines, that would have all gone straight in the bin. So it's going to happen at some point. And I thought it was interesting. They were just putting it out initially, and it's very, very clever from Liberty Media, because now in 2023 or 2024, if they do make an announcement that, I don't know, 2030 there's an electric engine, they can say, yeah, we told you about this in 2021. We told you about this years ago. So it's interesting they're just putting out little feelers, little seeds just out there, just to get people's thoughts on it. So I thought that was really interesting that they even just slightly mentioned it. I thought that was spicy. I thought that was very clever from Formula One. Again, I don't think it will happen for the foreseeable future. It would really surprise me if they did it before 2030, but it's an interesting one. It really is. And also, that's definitely a topic I'd love to talk about with someone on the podcast as well, is what will happen to Formula E if Formula One goes electric. Really find that interesting, that whole debate there. What other changes have we got then? I'll just give you a chance just to breathe. Just take this all in for a minute, because there are so many changes. Oh, and also I probably should say on that, 20% renewable energies or renewable sources in fuel. Yeah, I can't really be too upset with that. And the idea that they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint, I like that. So I suppose a good counter-argument to that, and probably a good little segue into the next stage, I was going to say 25 races, but there is something else I want to talk about first. So sorry, 25 races and cost cap still has to wait. Restrictions. Testing restrictions. So, of course, there is no official calendar for 2021, so we have no clue how many testing days we're actually going to get. But there is restrictions on a hell of a lot of testing. First of all, wind tunnels. Again, I'm not a very smart boy, so what they do in a wind tunnel, I'm not 100% clear on, but it's how they do a lot of their simulation work, to see how their car works in race conditions, in qualifying conditions, and to do simulations. That is being restricted now. They can only use it 400 times in the 2021 season. Every year after that, only 320. So this is going to massively cut costs for the team, but more importantly, it's going to massively cut how much understanding they have of the car. A bold change to Formula One, that is, but I like it. I like all this restriction they're giving on the teams. Practice, I've said for a very long time now, I think 3 sessions is far too long. They've not changed that far too much, but I like this. This is a first step for me. I like this. More restrictions, less understanding, for me, leads to more unpredictable racing, which I personally like. I know some people, and this is a big debate as well, some people just love to see Formula One pushed to its limits. Endless money, endless testing, the pinnacle, making the quickest cars every single year. And that's a big debate with these regulations. I'm confident people who don't like these regulations, one of their biggest sticking points is the fact the car's most likely going to be slower. They're going to be heavier as well, so lap times, we're not going to see world records being destroyed every single year, like we've seen for the past, I'd say 3 seasons since 2017. Every single year we seem to have had faster and faster cars. That will change. So that is something to bear in mind. But I don't mind. As long as there is overtaking, I think it's fine. Because personally, and this is huge personal preference, and I totally get this if you're on the other side of the coin. For me, if you showed me a lap of a 2019, well, let's say a 2019 Mercedes and a 2018 Williams, a huge difference there in lap times. Just in the naked eye, I wouldn't be able to tell you which car was quicker. Because let's be honest, a second to the naked eye doesn't look any different. You can't tell. So, for me, even if the cars are 4 or 5 seconds slower, that doesn't really bother me all that much. But that being said, I'm a Formula E fan, and they're considerably slower than Formula 1 cars. Does that bother me? Not really, because it's closer racing. It's more aggressive and unique racing than Formula 1 is. So, I suppose it swings and roundabouts. It's your personal preference. And it's also down to what you get out with Formula 1. I watch Formula 1 a few of the biggest things I love is strategy. I find that really interesting. I find design really interesting in Formula 1. I know at the beginning I said I'm a little bit unsure about the overall chassis design of the 2021 cars, but liveries I find really interesting. Helmet design I find really interesting. But aerodynamics, front wing end plates, things like that, I don't find as interesting. So I get that people like different aspects of Formula 1. Some people just want them to go as quick as they can. Some people want quick sprint races, get it done. I understand. But for me, I don't mind if they're slower. But I thought I should throw that in there because that is something that 2021 is bringing, is slower cars. But quicker racing, I can let it slide. Where was I? I can't remember. Oh yes, testing restrictions. I think what also is interesting, just to add on from that, safety features. A new introduction of rubber membranes will be added onto the car, and the idea of this is, so on your screen you can see that front wing, the end plate there, so that bit of red in front of the tyre, that'll have a rubber membrane around it, so if it does fall off the car, it's not as dangerous when it's just sitting on the circuit. I think that's a fine change. That doesn't really bother me either way. Added in for safety, probably will mean there's less safety cars, which I quite like a safety car period, but I get that safety is a huge factor in Formula 1, in modern Formula 1, so I understand that change. I can't be too mad. Upgrades. So we've spoken about limited testing, but upgrades on the car, because of how the layout has changed. So Formula 1 is making this big push for a 3-day Formula 1 weekend. At the moment, teams show up sometimes on a Monday to the country, and I'm sure they will still show up on a Monday to the country, but they're only allowed at the circuit for scrutineering, for practice, for setting up the garage from a Friday. Currently it's Thursday, so they will lose a whole day and it will go on to Friday. One of the big changes here is that if a new front wing is brought to the race weekend, they won't be allowed to race it unless they have shown given the specification, and in the scrutineering before the weekend they've said yes, we're going to use this front wing. But if they start with front wing A and in practice 2 they test a new front wing, they can't use that new front wing in the race. Really interesting development. I like it. Again, making it more unpredictable. Of course, in the next weekend they can use it if it's great. So it doesn't make a fat lot of difference, but it is an interesting one. And the idea, again, behind this change, because you might think to yourself, what a pointless change. What dummy dumb has designed that? But again, this one revolves around cost. What currently happens in Formula 1, they might bring out one new front wing. It finds them half a second a lap time. They suddenly have 24 hours to quickly ship out a new, or 2 or 3 new front wings because they will need spares. Becomes very, very expensive. It's just not needed. So I understand that change completely. Have I missed anything else on technical? The answer is probably yes. I'm just having a quick glance over my notes, but I think that's it. Reducing the gaps, making racing closer, making racing better. I hope you understood. I hope I wasn't a massive dummy. But let's move on to the bits I like. The bits I love. The bits I really love about 2021. You can probably already tell in my voice. I'm finding this more interesting. We've got a cost cap. We've got 25 races, and something I think was really glossed over, but I find this fascinating, is making more opportunities for young drivers. I will talk about that first, actually, because I think barely anyone's covered it. It was something I came across when reading through the regulations, and I'm 99% sure this doesn't happen in current Formula 1. I'm 99% sure this is new. It is now mandatory in 2 sessions over a year, so it could be any session, most likely practice. Every team in 2 sessions in the year has to use a driver that's partaken in 2 or fewer Grand Prix. So Mercedes, for 2 sessions in the season, have to have a young driver in their car that's never done more than 2 races. What a brilliant change. I absolutely love this. This is, again, so many people are missing this, but this is going to make so many more opportunities for young drivers. It's brilliant. Again, probably won't make the biggest difference in terms of the data teams will collect. It will reduce it a little bit, again, restricting the amount of practice, restricting the amount of understanding teams have on their car. So big thumbs up from me. But look at people, I'll tell you what, I'll mention him in the first podcast. Nick de Vries has never properly tested a Formula 1 car. McLaren this year, because they would have had to use a young driver, we could have seen Nick de Vries do 2 sessions over the course of the year. Just gives them that understanding of his pace compared to top drivers. And I suppose when we saw it with Lando Norris back in 2018 do a few sessions, but say McLaren didn't give him the opportunity, they would have had no idea what his pace was relative to Alonso and Van Dorn. So I really like this change. Again, it's nothing super major. We're not going to see suddenly an influx of hundreds of young drivers storming their way onto the grid, but I think it's a nice change. I think it's a change that, in the grand scheme of things, won't make much difference, but what it will do is it'll put the names on the map, and it'll create more of an interest, I think, with young drivers. Again, this might just be because I like Formula 2 and like looking into the younger guys and like it when they have a chance. But I think this is a positive change for the sport, and it's definitely in the right direction, and it's definitely better, million times better than 3 cars. There were lots of talk that maybe Formula 1 could do 3 cars and their third car's a young driver. I'm not a fan of that. I don't like that, but I think this is a good starting point. I'd love to see more, but this is a good starting point. Big thumbs up from me. The 2 big ones left, at least I think they're the 2 big ones left. 25 races and cost cap. We've been going for about 40 minutes, so I think timing's okay. I'll tell you what, let's go with 25 race calendar first, and we'll end on the cost cap, because I've got lots to talk about that with, and I can leave it on a cliffhanger then as well, if I really need to. Right, voice just broke then as well, apologies. Talking this long, I've not done it for a while. 25 races. Bold, I would say, really bold from Liberty Media to instantly come out and say, yeah, we're doing this. Because they've got to find races. They've got to find more races. Next year, we've got a 22 race calendar. And even then, it looks like Spain's only on a 1-year contract. And that's going to go. So, we have to find 4 more Grand Prix. This has been a change that is, at least from my understanding, and I'm going to put a little poll in the top right-hand corner, if you like 25 races or not. Of what I've seen on social media, people don't like it. People hate this change. I quite like it. I understand I'm in the minority, but I like 25 races. People say that having a race every 2 weeks, every 2 weekends it's going to ruin that special nature of Formula 1. For me, it won't. For me, I think, was it 3 in a row? Back to back to back? Earlier on this year? I love that. That was great. More of that, please. I absolutely loved it. And I suppose, for me, it's different. You know, I'm a student. I have weekends off. I have Fridays off at the moment. Of course, yeah, I do work for university and I have a spare or a part-time job as well. But for me, it's great. I love Formula 1. My life, if I'm not university or working, is Formula 1. I'm doing this for you guys and I love it. It's me. That's what I'm interested in. So more Formula 1, big thumbs up from me. I understand. And this is where it gets a little bit, a little bit dodgy. I understand that that's a hell of a lot to ask for the teams, and especially for the guys that, not necessarily back at the factory because they're working all year round anyway, but for people that work in Formula 1, let's take even, Will Buxton for an example. He's going to have to go to 3 or 4 more Grand Prix over the year and less time to see his family. Even Crofty and the commentating team, that's more and more time they're going to have to be at the circuit than at home. I mean, you could argue it's their job, and they should be, at work anyway, but that takes it out of you, going abroad that many times in a year, constantly flying around, body clock all over the place. I get that. For the teams as well, I understand. Flying out all that equipment, doing a job in the country, going away to another country, doing another job, it's going to become endless. For me, I understand that completely. I understand why that probably will put people off getting a job in Formula 1. But as I said, I think for a lot of us, and this again, personal preference, and I understand I'm in the minority, I'd love a job in Formula 1. Most people would love a job in Formula 1. And that's the sacrifice of the job. You see people working out on oil tankers. I don't know why I chose oil tankers, but 6 months they're away from their family. They don't get to come home, so it's going to be a negative for a lot of people, and I understand that. Formula One has or is making changes and is enforcing rules that are in place that haven't been abided. So first of all, we mentioned it a little bit earlier on, they're making weekends smaller. I personally don't think this will have much change. I think teams will still show up early on. They will do off-site different bits and bobs. So they'll do media, they'll set that up. They'll do that all before the Friday. Of course, they can't set up the garage and scrutiny the car before Friday, but they will still show up early and do training and adjust to the climate, probably at the same time they do now. Maybe you'll get one extra day. In the summer, and this is where I think it gets interesting. So in the summer, at the moment, there is a factory shutdown. It's almost a gentleman agreement. It is in the rules, but as I discussed in the summer, it's not actually abided by many of the teams. So the teams are pretty much instructed to have 2 weeks where no work is done on Formula One. But again, this happens. There's a small fine that's given out if they do work. And there you are. The reality is, and I think this is why I don't want to completely say this is awful. 25 races is going to ruin people's lives. I don't want to say that yet because I don't work in Formula One. I'm not a mechanic. Most people saying these things aren't a mechanic. They don't work in Formula One. So if any of you are, I'd really love to know your thoughts because it's those people on the ground, those people in the factories, it's them that it's going to have the effect on, and it's only them that can say how it's going to affect their lives. So I don't want to speak for them because there might be a huge part of this I'm totally missing, but from a fan, I don't mind it, and it won't ruin Formula One for me. I will say as well, it depends on where Formula One goes. Because if one weekend we're in the Antarctic, the next weekend we're in Australia, the next weekend we're in France, that's not great. That is definitely not brilliant. But I think we've seen over the past few years, they're really trying to make the calendar into stages. So we've got our flyaways, our Asian kind of, and Asia and Oceania start to the season. We then go into Europe. We then have this end of the season in the Americas. So they're trying to minimalise that as best they can. They're looking to have more races in the US. And I might as well talk about this now. Put it on a bit of a lighter note. Where are they going to go? So Spain isn't a universally loved track. I don't hate Spain, but it's not universally loved. So I imagine that will go. So we've got to find 4 more Grand Prix. Can we find 4 more Grand Prix? I think a Miami race will go ahead. I like the look of the circuit. I really like the look of the circuit, actually. I won't lie. I like that one. I'd love to see them go to Miami. I think potentially they would push for another race in the US. So we could potentially see 3 races in the United States. That would be a bold claim, but I think they could make it work. They're a fan base. They really want to engage into Formula One. Sorry, I just whacked my foot. Pilot episode, boys and girls. This is test episode. They want to make Formula One as big as they can in the US, and I totally get that. Although, from my analytics, my biggest audience is the US, but percentage-wise, the population of the UK to Formula One fans is much greater than the population of the US to Formula One fans. So they're trying to make an impact. So they might go back to Indianapolis. That would be I think that people would like that. Maybe not the American fans after 2005, but I can see them potentially going back there. Potentially a little bit of a dangerous circuit, but I could see that happening. I've still found those tracks. Right, so we'll go with number 1, Miami will come in. I think we will see a German Grand Prix come back. I'd love to see a Hockenheim or a Nürburgring. Either of those two. Or even a new track. I'd love to see that. We've still got to find 2 more, blimey. I think they will do a race in Africa. I think that's somewhere they've really got to try and expand into at least. So we used to have Kailami in South Africa. Not too sure whether that's a particularly wide track and brilliant for overtaking, but I will put that in for the time being because we don't want to be here forever. And finally, I've said this quite a while, I'd love to see a track in Scandinavia somewhere. Somewhere like Finland. How they've not got a circuit, I don't know. They need one. Somewhere, Switzerland don't particularly like racing. I know in Formula E that's been a really sticking point. Getting races and staying there has been difficult, so I don't think they'll go there. But a Sweden or a Norway, just somewhere up there, maybe a bit cold for Formula One. I'm not too sure, but I think they've got some really loyal fans. I know ST over on Twitter, big fan of the F1 words. I mean, he'd love a race. I believe he's from Norway. Oh God, if I've got that wrong, awful. But you know what I mean. There's fans all over the world, and I think we're a little bit lucky sometimes, especially UK fans. It's very easy for us to hop over to Belgium to go to the British Grand Prix. I say very easy. It's very expensive to go to Formula One. But you know what I'm saying. There's lots of close options for us. Whereas if you're living in Africa, I know quite a few of you are from South Africa. I imagine that's a real pain to go to Grand Prix. I imagine even if you're on the east coast of the US, it's difficult to go to a Grand Prix. So I think they will try and look at that geographically, where races are missing. And I will throw this in. I can't believe I almost forgot this. I would love them to bring back Malaysia. I love that track. I know it didn't get the best reception from the fans. I love that track. South Korea as well. I like that track. And even Turkey. So there's lots of options for them. I like it. It's controversial that I like it, but I like it. And finally, the cost cap. We're getting towards an hour, so I'm trying. I maybe not left myself a lot of time, but a cost cap. This is a huge day. Well, yesterday was a huge day for Formula One. First time financial regulations have been put in place. The figure, where is it on my board? 175 million, which I think is quite small. I expected it to be about 500 million. But 175 is a big reduction. But in saying that, marketing and external activities like marketing, so I imagine accounting, things like that, they're not included. Driver salaries are not included, so that would have been a huge chunk. I mean, Lewis Hamilton, I think, is on about 43 million a year, so that's a huge chunk of money there that's going to be not included. And also the top three earners in the team, so your team principal, probably your aerodynamic chief, and maybe your racing director, they won't be included in the cost cap. So I like those changes. I'll quickly mention why they're not being included. First of all, the drivers, I can totally understand that. That leaves teams completely open. Because, I mean, a Kimi Raikkonen moving to Alfa Romeo, if team and driver salaries were included in that, there's no way that would have happened. So I like that. Top three figures in the team not being included, I think that makes sense as well. And marketing, this is one that some people, I'm surprised at this, some people weren't a fan. Or at least, again, when I say some people, I just mean a few comments I've seen on the internet, not the best source of information. They weren't happy that marketing wasn't included in the cost cap. I don't know why. Marketing, yes, it brings in sponsors. That's going to be a big factor. Sponsors won't be as big a factor as they are now, though. However, they will obviously still be huge, but not as big. So maybe pay drivers. It'd be interesting to see what happens to those in the future. I don't think we have many of those anymore in Formula One, but that'll be interesting. But marketing's brilliant. Imagine if they put marketing in the cost cap. There would be no marketing. It wouldn't exist. There's no point. The whole point of marketing for Formula One, again, is to bring in sponsors. So very easily, they can just send their drivers off to do something and put it off the books. So why do that anyway? But otherwise, you'll only have Formula One marketing. You won't see any. I remember a couple of years ago, McLaren and Lucozade did a special drink. You won't see any of that. You won't see any Lewis Hamilton Monster Energies. I don't know why drinks are on my mind. Probably I'm thirsty. But there won't be any of that. Why does that need to be in the cost cap? I don't know. So I love the fact it's not. I don't think it'll make any difference to the amount of marketing teams do, but sensible for me anyway, that it's not included. Because it's 175 million, doesn't mean teams have to reach that 175 million. It also means that teams most likely will go over the 175 million. The cost cap will be introduced next season, 2020, but there will be no penalties if they go over it. So it's more just to monitor how teams spend their money and for the FIA and Formula One just to understand how they can regulate it. For 2021, there will be penalties. However, it all depends on how much team go over by and in what sectors. So penalties can range from a small fine, spending more money, ironic, can range from that all the way to a full team disqualification from the championship. So it's a big range there. could go wrong. A cost cap, I've said this a few times, and my opinion hasn't really changed. I think it's just really difficult to police. My example I always use is Haas. They're a team, we spoke about it a little bit earlier on with transferable parts. Yes, going back to my parts classifications, I'm learning. They buy from Ferrari. That's staying in place. But what they also do, their chassis is made externally by a company called Dallara. They do all the research and development. Haas just buy the chassis. How does the FIA monitor how that works? I'm sure that's exactly why they're bringing it in next year, just to monitor how teams spend their money and how they can track how much team spending is going on. Likewise with what I said earlier with Red Bull and Toro Rosso. If they work together to make a part, is it just a 50-50 split on the costs? Is that how it's going to work? I'm not too sure. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they police it. Because do they then say, well, Dallara spent 10 million on research and development. Haas only took, let's say Haas spent 12 million to buy the part. Well, are Haas then charged 22 million? Have they, in effect, got 10 million for free because they've not done the development themselves? That's what's going to be interesting. So, I expect at least one team to break financial fair play. It's not called that, is it? It's called a cost cap, but we'll call it financial fair play. I expect one team next year. I expect all the teams to break it next year, but in 2021, I think there will be a few issues with it. I don't think it'll be a smooth transition, but as Formula One said, all of the regulations are a work in progress, and over next year, they will make tweaks and changes. They may even up the cost cap. That is a possibility on the cards, but I like the idea of it. I'm just nervous that policing it could be difficult. And I think that's it. I think that's everything. 57 minutes. Quite a long episode. But I'm glad I did this. I really wanted to just take a little bit of time. Because you can't say... It's very easy to say, look, what's changed in 2021? Design, cost cap, 25 races, ground effect, slower cars, young drivers... Very easy to do that. I'm surprised things like tyre changes, refuelling, no qualifying changes, no practice restrictions really, in terms of we've still got practice 1, 2 and 3. I'm surprised they haven't been discussed, but very easily. Next year, they can still work on it and they can make changes. These are very minor things. There have been a few complaints that not enough has changed. We've still got time. Very easy. Just because 2021 is the big headline year of when everything's going to change, doesn't mean in 2022 we can get rid of DRS, we can change quality, we can still do that. So, I'm optimistic. I like the changes. Cars look good. Cars look sexy. As much as I said I'm not a huge fan, I like the look of them a lot. Just need to take a bit of getting used to. 25 races, I'm a fan of. That's controversial. Think of that what you will. But that's it. I'll stop talking. I'll have a drink in a moment. Hopefully you enjoyed the first episode of the Motorsport Lounge podcast, or the pilot episode, episode 0, the testing episode. Again, usually, I'm not planning on doing this anyway. I might very well just keep it just me, but I'm planning on doing someone else. So let me know who you would like to see on the show, or the podcast, or whatever I call it. It's all a work in progress. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, well done to you. Well done. This has been a real learning curve for all of us, I think. But if you're new and you're listening or watching on YouTube, feel free to subscribe. I don't really know what I say about the podcast stuff. Leave a rating. Is that a thing? Maybe. I don't know. I hope you enjoyed anyway, and I hope to see you on the next episode of the Motorsport Lounge podcast.